Well, maybe we can continue in a slightly different context this conversation. Dow Sanderson is going to lead us into the next phase of the conversation, which has to do with communion and canons, I guess, ecclesiology.
Thank you. Bishop Jeffrey Shorey, thank you for being with us this afternoon. I guess it is now almost afternoon. My name is Dow Sanderson. I'm the rector of the Church of the Holy Communion, which was an Oxford movement parish and continues to be a traditional Anglo-Catholic parish, so I get the ecclesiology question. I'm also a private pilot, and I'd rather talk to you about flying, but what I thought I would do is to read a short statement that begins with our request a couple of years ago for an alternative primatial relationship. And I thought that what I'd like to do is to talk about the motivation behind that. Because you can read the statement, you can read the comments that were there on Kendall's blog, or you can read things that came out on the Via Media websites. But I don't think you can really hear our heart and what was behind that. And I thought that that might be a helpful place to begin the conversation on ecclesiology. When the Standing Committee of our diocese requested an alternative primatial relationship now nearly 2 years ago, we tried to be very clear that we were not schismatic malcontents. At a clergy day just a few weeks after our request was published, it was explained to us by the president of the Standing Committee that what we were requesting was not something like the AMIA or other groups who have allied themselves with foreign primates. We wished instead to work through the channels initiated by the Archbishop of Canterbury, by the primates, and by the Windsor process. Being authentically Anglican, as we put it, was of great importance. But it seemed clear to us that the process by which the Anglican Communion would sort itself out could potentially be very protracted. We therefore felt that this interim request for an alternative relationship was necessary because it seemed to us that the Episcopal Church continued to take actions that were contrary to God's will as revealed in Scripture and sacred tradition. It also seemed clear to us that the unilateral actions of the Episcopal Church put its standing in the Anglican Communion very much at risk. That's the way it seemed, certainly at the time. And the 11th hour lobbying by Bishop Griswold to get BO 33 passed at the last General Convention sort of illustrates, at least for me, the precarious position that we were in at that time. The response to our request was that many called us, as it went out into the blogosphere somewhere, we were called disloyal and schismatic and rebellious. And I think the irony is that we were simply stating our fidelity to the whole deposit of faith within the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And I would hope that our recent patience during our very long Episcopal election lends some credulity to that notion. The Episcopal Church, on the other hand, seemed to be saying that God was directing it to a new way of thinking, and if the rest of the communion was not on board with that, it was willing, sadly, to pay the price. Clearly, that seemed, again, to us to be much more of a schismatic attitude than anything that we had ever said. Now, of course, the whole communion is in disarray with a multitude of plans in competing jurisdictions, who will go to Lambeth, who won't. Some of us here today applaud the efforts of movements like Common Cause. Others of us, while sympathizing with their theology, believe the strategy to be flawed. But whether we agree strategically or not, there seems to be fairly universal agreement that the reason we find ourselves in this dilemma is that the Episcopal Church, by its unilateral actions, has pushed the limits of Anglican diversity, or as William Butler Yeats put it, the center cannot hold. So that's sort of a long statement. It's not a question, but I hope that it would give you some insight perhaps into the motivation of our request and to sort of describe the dilemma as perhaps we see it in the Diocese of South Carolina, and I'd be grateful for your response. Thank you.
I think we're in a different place today than we were nearly 2 years ago. You may disagree with this, and I'm certainly not speaking for the whole, but my sense is actually that the level of anxiety in many parts of the communion is lower than it was 2 years ago, or at and after the General Convention 2006. We continue in most places to try to build relationships across the communion, to go back and forth, to begin to learn more about what it means to be an Anglican in this part of the communion and what it means to be an Episcopalian here, and the variety of contexts that here represents. My sense is that, with a couple of exceptions, places that are actually seeking to move out of the Episcopal Church, we're clearer about the fact that this church intends to hold a comprehensive breadth to its identity. There's an enormous sadness when one party to a relationship seeks to leave. It diminishes all of us. When one part of the body says, I no longer have need of you. We have need of all parts of the body. The tradition that you speak for is one of the great energizing parts of our tradition. It's not the whole of it, but it's a very central and significant piece.
Sometimes we like to think so.
Oh, we all do. We all do. We all like to think we're the center of the universe. I think that's what the first part of this morning was about. At the same time, I'm just reflecting on the connection with what the person who spoke just before you wanted to focus on, faithfulness in relationship. If somebody walks away, we're all diminished. Our response needs to be to try and hold that whole relationship together.
Go back to the microphone.
Right.
Just I want everybody to be able to hear.